I would probably take an average 1-2 grinder playing his A game over an average 25-50 grinder playing his C game any day.
You're listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast. Each week, you'll get to peek inside the greatest minds in the game and discover what makes them successful.
Mental toughness separates those that can't handle the stress.
If you're going to treat it like an amateur, you're probably going to have amateur results.
Now here's your host, Elliot Rowe.
Hey, Elliot Rowe here. I'm very excited to announce that for the next few episodes, Stephen Baker will be guest hosting the show. Stephen has experience both as a professional poker player, strategic coach, and now a member of my mindset performance coaching world. I can confidently say that Stephen's one of the world's leading experts in poker mindset and performance, and I'm really excited to hear the conversations he has with some fantastic guests. And with that, here's Stephen.
Welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Baker. My guest on today's podcast is a longtime client of mine, Henrik Johansson. I describe Henrik as the best poker player you've probably never heard of. The reason for that is that Henrik climbed the stakes, starting with $10 and eventually taking on some of the best heads-up players in the world and coming out winning. He so preferred anonymity throughout that whole period of his poker career that he actually thought about declining a chance to play effectively for free in the World Series of Poker Europe. Against his judgment at that time, he decided to play, to go along with a friend and have some fun, and he won the tournament. Henrik's an incredibly original thinker, and he's now transferred his skills from poker into real estate investment with a view specifically to solving a big social problem within the field of real estate and home ownership. So let's sit back and listen to Henrik, who's an incredibly interesting individual, a very individual thinker, and somebody who's now using his poker skills to solve wider problems. So Henrik, welcome. Great to have you on the podcast. I've already introduced you to the listeners, the viewers, as a client of mine. I think you're, one way of describing you might be the best ex-poker player that they've never heard of, because you played at the highest levels, but you never really went out there and made a big show of it. We'll get to that in a while, but I really want you to talk a little bit about yourself. And firstly, before we get into what you're doing now, which is different but has crossovers, which we'll talk about, I want you to talk about your poker background. How did you first get into poker? Because you started at a very early age.
Yes, yeah, true. Yeah. So just give a little bit of a background. So I'm 32 now. And I think I started to play poker. I was probably like 13 maybe the first time I started to play it. And started to play with, I think, money when I was around 15. So I've been in poker like really long. And the last few years, I kind of been out of it as well. But yeah, it's true. I started when I was very young. It's a very flattering what you're saying. I'm not sure. I mean, I had in poker, I think I was good in a niche in poker, maybe like of shallow stack, no limit, because there was mainly that which I focused on. I did quite well in poker, and I started really the lowest stakes. I think 1 cent, 2 cent, and I finished at the highest stakes. So yeah, quite a journey. Yeah.
Yeah, let's just talk about that progress, because it is interesting, having started so young, and not that we would positively recommend that somebody of 13 get into poker, but you did, so it's a reality. And I'm just quite interested about that, because you obviously just started for fun. Just tell us a little bit about what it was that attracted you at that age to get into poker.
Yeah, I think that in many ways, poker was me. Like I was very into football when I was young, and so that was a kind of complete obsession for me. And that was an interest that I had, and it was more or less like occupied all my thinking and a lot of my time. I went to football school as well, and or my classmates were football players. That was really kind of my world. And at some point there, I sort of lost interest in that. And I think I wanted to fill that thing with something new. And this would have been around kind of when there was this poker boom as well. So poker was just something that was kind of in the world at the moment. Like you could put on the TV and it would actually be like poker there. And so it seemed, I don't know what made my interest in this, but it was just something that I was like, well, I need to learn more about this. And so I went, I think one of the first things I did is I went and I bought like a video game. It was a World Series of Poker video game. And I bought this game. I actually did not know the rules of like poker, like, the hand rankings or anything like this. So I just bought this game. It was like a PlayStation game, and I started to play it and kind of learned the rules for actually playing that game. And, it was just, poker was one, it was also this fascinating world. And there was, in this game, they were playing in exotic locations and, they were like playing outside in Hawaii, and all of these ideas was just, especially for a kid, it's very like dreamlike and very interesting. So, and then so I played that, and then I started to play with some play money online, and then after a while I was sort of realizing, well, play money, people don't really take it that seriously, and I actually really want to learn how to play this. I need to play for money, so I had to then convince my father to put some money so I could like learn and do my new hobby basically. And I then picked, I did some research and I picked party poker, because party poker was like this. So I heard that that's where like the weakest players are. So he put $10 there, which was the lowest I could play was 1 cent, 2 cents, and you had to buy in for $2. So I was like, I had a 5 buying bankroll basically. And I think I was down to like $6.50, something like this. So that was like, it was a risky situation, but yeah. So, but I turned that around, and that's actually the only money I ever used for poker. So I built my bankroll from that $10. And, it was kind of this combination of, one, you're a kid, so like money which for an adult would seem like a lot of like not that much money, like $10 or $20 is actually quite meaningful. The other part was just that I knew it wasn't going to sound good if I go back to like my father and ask, can you put $10 more on? They'd probably be quite worried, or thinking this is not working out. So it was super, super important for me to make this grow and like not lose it. So
how old were you then, Henrik? How old would you have been then?
So I think I got this $10. This was when I was like on my birthday. I think it was when I was 15.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, what I like about that story is the fact that even at that age you were researching. You weren't just plonking that $10 on any old site, or the site with the nicest software. Because I think you and I both shared a bit of a love for the full tilt.
Yes.
Software. I mean, that's my favorite. But you actually worked out where the best opportunity was, the biggest EV was, and that was party poker, which I think was probably pretty accurate back in those days. So yeah, go on, carry on anyway. So there you go. You managed to make that $10 last. Tell us a little bit more about where you went with from there.
Yeah, I mean, so I think in the beginning I was kind of, just trying to build this up. In the beginning, and this might be quite common, I think a lot of people in the beginning, when they start, they play a little bit of everything. So I was no different. I was playing a bit of the cash games. I was playing a bit of the sitting goes. The main one I wasn't playing that much was tournaments, but it was more to do with the schedule and these type of things. But yeah, I kind of played everything. I think that, I mean, for me, one of the things that was quite early is I remember is that because I did like that full tilt, and at the time full tilt they had these really high stakes games, and you could kind of rail them, so you could just open up the table and you would watch, and you would sit and you see it would be players like Durr, like Phil Ivey, like Patrick Antonius, and they were all playing this kind of 200, 400, I think was the highest stakes then. And I remember I used to like to watch these games, and it was one, like, for me, this is quite odd, but it was like a player it was called like Luck 123, and he was this player, and he was playing like Tottenham at Omaha, and he was playing this like 200, 400 games, but he would always like buy in for the minimum. So for some reason, my interest sort of got like, what is this guy doing? Like, what is he's buying in for the minimum. He only sits with $8,000, not like Phil Ivey would sit with 80,000, and Durr like 100,000, and all of this. But it was something like, I was like, what is this guy doing? What type of strategy does he have? And so, because for some reason I was always very into like this risk mitigation and like trying to like look for the downside rather than like gamble and make big bets and things like this. So I kind of studied him a bit, and then in some way I found out he was part of some Swedish poker firm, because he was a Swedish guy. And then I sent to him like some, it must have been like extremely badly written emails, because like I was not so good with writing, and anyway, so it was, but in some way he managed to understand my questions, because I was asking him a lot about like, what do you do with the strategy, how's it work, etc. And he was really, really nice in answering these things. And so he was a very unusual player. I think he was actually quite old. He was, I think, 55 or something. This would have been around, 2007, 2008, something like this, or maybe 2006 it was even. And, so he was an older guy. He had been in like, I think, working with like risk management in banks and things like that. And so he was, but he told me some basic things that he said that this is the most important. And he said, the most important is not actually the game. It's bankroll management, it's tilt control, and it's table selection. And he said, these are like the most important. And then like, how you play, etc. It's also is important, but you can be really good at how to play. If you don't have these three things, you're not going to do so well. And this is something I really kind of took to heart and really thought a lot about. And he was also quite early on that you should have like 100 buy-ins for, the games that you play and these type of things. At the time, like the standard would have been, you should have, like, if you are like kind of normal would be 20 buy-ins, this was actually the advice that was general at the time. So yeah, that was kind of like a good kind of principle. And so I tilted towards trying to copy and build a similar strategy with short stacking in the cash games. For some reason that always appealed to me. And I kind of never really moved away from that, I would say. I kind of just kept that in my whole career. I got into like playing a bit more heads up and playing versus kind of quite famous players. So like, and you could say maybe table selection wasn't there, but I always thought about if I have an edge or these type of things. But I generally stuck to playing this more shallow stack and no limit, and kind of keeping that as my focus, basically.
It's really interesting because we're going to come in a minute, because the things you did very differently, I think, from a lot of successful poker players. And I'm going to ask you about that phase of your career where you effectively go into the lab. And it's something I've seen you do in business as well. And we'll talk about your business later, where you went into the lab and you did some really deep thinking. But it's also interesting that you did something which I think is, very common amongst successful players. Early on, you reach out for some mentorship in the form of this specific player who's given you some really sound advice. And it's really interesting that the advice he comes back with is not first and foremost technical. It's around foundations, around the way you're managing your risk and your mindset. Is that something you've really utilized in a broader context? I mean, obviously we talk about poker, and I do want you to continue the chronology because it's really interesting what happens after this conversation. But is that something you took forward into your business career? That sort of understanding of risk management and the importance of mindset?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like I since I kind of stopped playing poker, I spent a lot of time in kind of investing. And, I think it's definitely there in terms of investing. And if you study all of the best investors, there's many things that they all do differently. But one of the main things is that they're all very, very focused on the downside. And how do you actually mitigate risk, And so I think that focus is one that I actually started to think more about it once I got into investing, is that I was so using quite an investor type of approach to poker. And I don't know why when I opened this full tilt poker game of 200, 400, why my interest went towards the guy who had the least amount of money at the table. I can't answer that, but that is just me and my kind of personality. But because I always felt that also shallow stacking or playing a short stack was this thing where it was quite hard to lose. It was a thing that you can kind of figure out that you would have an edge. It was also, if you want to sort of talk a little bit more nerdy about it, like the standard deviation divided by your win rate kind of ratio, which is another way of basically saying it's a sort of Sharpe ratio of poker, if you will. It's what kind of hedge funds would track their the risk return profile on is pretty much the best. I think the shallow stack is the best kind of return from a risk perspective in cash games. So I don't know. This is just how my mind is going towards this direction. But that's definitely that is definitely a link between, I think, poker and in investing world. Yeah.
So when you receive this advice from Luck 123, what sort of bankroll level did you have then? Were you still very much at the foothills? Because it's not too long after that. So by the time you're in your late teens when you're already playing at high stakes, right? So just take us on that little journey.
Yeah.
Between.
I think at the time when I said that, I think I was playing probably like 25 cents, 50 cents, and like 50 cents a dollar. So I'm around probably like 15 here at around this time, I mean, I have like I would say like 1,000 or 2,000 euros the bankroll, or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but probably around there. Yeah.
Okay, so what happened from there to propel you up to the high stakes?
So I think I mean I was basically just kind of improving and moving up like stake by stake. I would say I think that I had what was quite helpful for me is because I did a little bit of everything, and then I started to quite focus on sit and goes. Primarily, it was think it was there were 5 max sit and goes actually with 5 players, and then top 2 would pay. And I played on I think it was on game. It was and you got like some really nice like rake back deals there. So I like this kind of format. So I remember I kind of played them quite a bit. I had this sort of I remember I bought like a Dell. It was like a Vostro 1700. It was like a 17-inch laptop. I picked it out specifically because it had like a good pixels. You know? Yeah. So I was playing there, and I remember it was like in the summers late. I was listening to a lot of like Tom Petty, and I was playing this this thing goes. And I remember, I think that kind of helped me to build up. And then I was like, okay, now I want to go over to the cash games and use this kind of shallow stacking approach. And then I started to play like their 1, 2 to 4, and I think I played quite a bit on full tilt poker. And then I just built it up there, and then I was kind of, you know, making probably like 5 big blinds per 100, playing like 2, 4, 3, 6, and a few tables at the same time. So I was making like $75 an hour or something like this. And you know, in Sweden it was all tax free, and it was, you know, quite easy. And I was living at home, of course, at this age, and not really a big fan of school. The whole reason for me to go to school, as I thought, was maybe I learned something about how to start a company. But the idea to work for anyone was just like not very interesting at all for me. Like also from a very early age, and perhaps poker was another way to escape that actually idea to work for someone else. So I had to, in school, we had to go and do some work, like as work experience. And I was going to be in a bookstore. I think they told me you have to be in this bookstore for 6 weeks. And I went there the first day, and it was I think I came in at 10 or something, and I was there for a couple of hours, and they said, "Oh, it's a lunch break now." And I just thought after this lunch break, I was like, "This is I cannot do this." So I actually went home, and I was like, I told my parents, like, I have to stop school. Like, this is such a waste of time. And actually, then I quit school, and yeah. So this is kind of like as much as I could take was this 2 hours. And from 17, I kind of played full time, basically. And that really helped me a lot, because I was then able to focus 100% on the poker, and then I think when I started to play full time, I was playing the mid stakes, and then after 1 year, or maybe a little bit more than 1 year, I was playing 25-50. So I kind of moved up quite quickly after I could like fully dedicate myself to it. So yeah.
Yeah, and so at this stage, you were still playing the shallow stack strategy. What you were joining? What 6 max tables or
yeah?
I
moved up. I moved up from. I played on full tilt. I think that's the site I kind of moved up the most. So they had the shallow stack games there, and they were pretty good games. And yeah, so I just kind of kind of keeping the strategy of just like, table selecting. I was like, would color code everyone who was a reg in red, and then like a fish would be green. You could kind of see it in the lobby. And I just joined the tables that were, were good. So I just focused on these kind of key principle, table selection. I was kind of playing pretty short sessions as well, like, I used to play like 1 hour sessions. I was very, like, I was so, like, like in terms of the system and all of that, like very, 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 very disciplined. Like probably way more disciplined at that moment than I would have been kind of later on. But I was very disciplined, and I had a very clear goal to move up to 2550. Because for me, what I saw is like, if you play 2550 online and you're winning there, you should be like, really, this is like, probably the highest achievement you can actually do in poker, I would say, because anyone can like win the tournament. The games that are played above 2550 are actually quite often softer than 2550 themselves. And I just knew that I knew that, well, if I get to 2550 and I'm winning there, doesn't matter if I win 2 big blinds per 100. That is a dollar a hand. You play 200 hands an hour. That's a really good hourly rate. Tax free and all of these things. So I was very just focused on getting to 2550, which I think. I see some people like they are, if you play cash games, that should be your goal online. Like it does not make sense that you try to play the mid stakes and I optimize my win rate there. Your goal should be to get to 2550. That should be the goal, and just learn as much as possible. To be able to get to 2550, so yeah.
So you got there. How old were you when you got there?
Probably would have been around. I'm just thinking about like the age because I'm born in April, so I'm not sure, but I think it would have been probably 19, something like this. Yeah. It would have been early 2011. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at some stage after that, you became more of a heads-up player. And there was a phase, I know from having spoken to you many times before, that there was a phase where you went into the lab. Effectively, I think most poker players kind of learn as they learn to build the plane as they're flying the plane. You did a bit of that, obviously, from when you started up to this point, but then there was a phase when you decided, I'm going to go away and I'm going to really study and come back with some insights. Tell me a little bit about that. How did that come about?
Yeah.
And tell me about the move into heads up.
Yeah, I think I never moved to heads up in the sense that I only played heads up, but I started to become so basically. I played before, I played some heads up sitting goals and things like that, but I was never really specializing on heads up. I think basically my journey up to 2550 was mainly just copying other good players, and that's, I think, it's very logical. It makes sense. It's one of the things I would do, which I think is still one of the best ways to learn, is that there was these sites where you could kind of see hands of other good players and hands that they got to showdown for them. So you could see what hand they had. And I would essentially just every day at least go over 20 of these hands where I pick a good player, kind of played some games that was familiar to me. And I would just kind of put press and then before I could see what they would do, I'd think what would I do in this situation? How would I play it? The hand, go to the flop. Would I see bet here? Would I check? All of these things. And I would always think ahead before first of what I do, and then I would watch and see what they did. But I think my journey up to 2550 was just copying whatever other good players were doing and try to kind of incorporate it into my game. And then I started to just become at a level where it was for sure I was always watching what anyone was doing, like good players and always observing. But it was more getting to the point where I had to actually start to use my own head more in order to kind of keep growing my game. So I think I was just going away a little bit from copying and starting to think a bit more myself. And also as I was moving up and I got like a bit more confidence, and I think Heads Up was actually quite an accidental thing for me. I just more or less was sitting at I think maybe it was 2550 or 5100, because I played also on a site called 888 Poker quite a lot. And there was just some guy who started to play, and I was like, okay, I'll play a little bit. Because before that, I just mainly played the 6-max, and I would actually not even play. And I was like, well, I can see like how I can win versus this player. And then I just started to like win, more and more. And I was like, well, maybe I can play Heads Up now. And the results were quite good, and I felt like I had the edge versus the player. So it just became a natural thing. And in terms of, studying and improving my game, I always think I had a relatively high, what you sort of would say, study to play ratio. I always liked the idea to think about the game and how to improve, etc. And at that time there was no solvers or anything like this. I never actually used really any of the solvers even after they came. I think my career was a bit more before this, or going on when the solvers were not really that good. So a lot of the learning had to do with just your own thinking and a little bit of intuition. So it's quite different than what the game is now, where you can actually look up the answers. You had to then think, well, does this make sense to do here? And you had to really, develop a bit of a feel for it, there was things like, for example, I remember like Heads Up, people had all these different ideas. And I can tell you one idea was that if you 2x in the small blind, the optimal defense frequency in the big blind would have been 50%, because it's sort of like the pot odds situation. Yeah. That idea was, and some people were religious about this, and you could work it out with a pen and paper that obviously the hand does not end, and it goes to the flop. So the math or the idea that these players had was quite wrong. And if someone just defends like 50%, you should easily open any 2 cards. And these people that defended 50%, they had such a belief, and they always kind of referred to themselves as GTO players and all of these kind of silly things. It was amazing because they were so locked in their own heads that they were actually right, that even if you open any 2 cards versus them, and they would get absolutely destroyed in known showdown, they would just keep on doing it. So it's very, very amusing. So at some point, I started to play a bit more Heads Up. I would say I probably had about 50% of my hands I played Heads Up, and 50% in the 6-max. Heads Up is a game where, in the beginning I had a couple of years, or maybe 1.5 years, where a lot of people were playing me. And that was really good because I got some people to play me who was, I was definitely beating. And, but they were still kind of giving a bit of action. And then that's just dried up a lot. And there was very, very few players who gave me action. And I would just sit for 6 months with a table and wait, for 1 or 2 guys to show up to play a little bit. Then naturally you start to play more 6-max again.
Absolutely, but is that the fact that basically the population recognised that you were beating them? Is that how it came to pass? Because I do want to talk about, because you played OTB Red Baron, I think, True Teller. I can't remember whether you played Doug Polk.
I think the players. I mean, the player who's probably known. I played them quite a bit with is Stuart Taylor, because he played. He actually kind of came up with the shallow stack as well, so he was playing those games quite a bit. And then I played. So I played with him. OTB, I'm not sure I played that much with. But yeah, I think a lot of it's interesting, this thing of like who are the best players and all of that thing. And I think it's kind of fascinating as well, because, I think when I started to play, the Americans and maybe the Northern Europeans were the best players. And then definitely the best players after were all more or less more from the East, let's say. I mean, with Eastern Europe, I think primarily.
Yes.
And, it's just interesting to observe, I'm not sure if it's connected to the, but you can see, like, if you think about countries and macros and things like that, they actually, the US, if you use poker as a kind of like a small little universe, the US kind of banned online poker. And at the time when I think it was banned, they had the best players in the US. And I think after that, for sure, they did not have the best players anymore. And the places where they kept poker open, like Russia and Belarus, I think they were ended up being the best. But yeah, I've seen also some players, like one guy I played quite a bit with, and he played. I think his name was Mysekant, and it's played on PokerStars. I remember what I think was interesting with him is that I think it was like 2010, 2011. He was not a very good player. Like, he was kind of winning at these high stakes games, but like barely. I remember he would do things like he had a small blind versus a big blind strategy. Would be like he just open shoved or fold. so that was like how he played there. And he was, but in the end, I think when I played, I would say he was pretty much one of the best players in the world at that format. And I think it's very interesting how he kept in there. And over the years, he actually probably went from one of the least good regulars. I think I would also put myself in that category of one of the worst regulars, maybe in when I just got to 2550. But the fact that he kind of kept in and moved up and became one of the best ones, it's quite interesting. And poker moves really quickly. You would have some players. I would have some players I read in a magazine, like high stakes Finnish poker players, and they would be like, "Oh, this is really cool. I wish I could be this good." And then a couple of years later, you're playing them heads up, and you're like begging that they do not stop playing. So it's really fascinating with poker. It changes so quickly, and if you want to think like who is the best players, etc., it's probably the ones who been staying in the game for a longer period of time, especially with cash games, because cash games is more like an endurance thing, and especially you have to have if it's not like our sports or games, like you play tennis, you're a really good tennis player, and you 7 out of 10 tournaments you win, you would be seen as one of the best players in the world, And the other 3 tournaments, you play terrible and you go out and you in the first round and you lose all the sets and everything. Like, people still say, "Wow, 70% wins in tennis tournaments is amazing." Now, if you do this in poker, in a cash game, where you, not even, let's say 70%, but like 80 or 90% of the days, you are like really good. You play really well and you're winning. And 10 or 20% of the days, you are just terrible. You play when you're drunk or you do stupid things. You can actually lose more money in those 10, 20% of the days. And I don't think anyone would actually view you as a good cash game player overall. They would say, well, some days is good, some days is not good. Overall, I think
absolutely
judge on the overall in poker. So really, you have to have a high sort of low. The lowest level should be you should still be playing pretty well, I would say.
I agree with that. I mean, I've actually seen players like that. Worked with players whose good is very, very good, but who have a leak of one sort or another, which means that sometimes it even manifests within a session. And like sometimes there's a quite simple explanation. I've worked with players who cannot walk away from the table. They want to stay there for too long, and they kill their winnings in the final couple of hours of a session. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. That's a really important skill, that ability to maintain a good level. I just want to talk about two things, really. I've already alluded to it once. One is that period in the lab, because obviously you've already described the fact that what you didn't have at that stage is what we all have these days, which is solvers. That period where you went into the lab, it was all pen and paper. What kind of, I mean, it doesn't matter. You can maybe feel you can give it away now. But what kind of insights, what were you doing in that period where you said, right, I'm going to go and study more deeply because I've got to be, and again, I'd be interested to know, was this as a result of the action drying up and you just thought, well, I might as well study a bit more? But what were you doing and what kind of insights did you get during that period?
Yeah, I mean, I think one is like when you do play high stakes, a lot of the time you're just waiting for games to happen. Yeah. But you do have that kind of time you're naturally going to be studying probably more. And in terms of what I would be doing, I mean, one thing is I would always just really think a lot about the game, and for me, that was like, in saying that, it just seems obvious. But talking to other players who are like playing very, very high stakes as well, they always said that, Henrik, you seem to be just thinking way more about this game than we are, So that's just one thing. And to try to always, question kind of everything. I mean, so I would really think about everything in the game. I would think about sizing quite a bit. I mean, that was one thing I thought, like, especially if you play kind of, cash games, and you would sort of, you play on, I don't know, let's say you play, it's a 50-100. You kind of would think, well, if I have an edge, like, how can you actually, in a way, kind of change the game from being 50-100 to maybe being 120-60? This is just more like a thought idea, But if you have an edge, you kind of want to increase the size of the game a bit, which you can do in many ways. I mean, one would be that you would kind of throw in more things like overbets, because if you have a feeling like, well, now this time this person is definitely going to call me because of so and so reason, that's a thing that kind of adds to your ability to maybe increase the stakes. Sometimes it would be the opposite, where you make a smaller bet because it's going to be more likely they're actually going to be kind of racing you, and then so actually quite often betting kind of a mid-size is actually what keeps the average game like the lowest stakes possible. So I would also kind of generally do a lot of different things in the game that would be, kind of maybe seen as a bit of random. Like I always thought it would be a good idea to have an image of a person who just does a lot of random things, because it makes people pay actually less attention to what you are actually doing. So you're kind of like disguising things a bit like this. I think another thing as well is like, which I thought quite a bit about, was trying to identify situations where I kind of knew that my opponents would not be necessarily comfortable or knowing what to do in a certain situation. It's sort of it was a long time ago since I read this post, but I think there was a guy who made a post about on 2+2, and he was talking about like street poker and like kind of making people go to the streets, and in the streets the rules are different because you're playing street poker, and it's something to that, where if you make a certain place that people are not really used to, they get into this a little bit of a different game. Within that game, you can kind of figure out, if you have a sense of their personality, what they might be end up doing. So if you're in a situation when you put a lot of pressure on them and you know that they are not sure what to do with a lot of their hands in this situation, you make let's say a big river bet, right?
Yeah.
You have a feeling on their personality, like this guy is very curious, he is very conservative, or vice versa. You know that they're in an unknown situation. When a person is in an unknown situation, they would generally tilt towards their own personality, which you kind of figure out. And that's kind of the way how you can exploit people, is that you kind of have to tap into what is an uncertain situation for this player, and because of what their personality and the playing style, what will they actually end up doing in that situation. Overbets are generally a quite good way to get, or at that time was a good way to get people into that.
Absolutely.
That spot. So yeah.
And you've kind of been vindicated by the solvers subsequently, because the solver, one of the things the solvers have taught us is the use of overbets.
Yes. Yeah.
Like even today, you'll see somebody like Adamo in the tournaments, puts people in consistently difficult spots with these huge overbets. But very well, a bit like your own, calibrated. Of course, you didn't have the solver to lead you there. You kind of came to this really from first principles. It would be remiss, although you were primarily a cash game player, as you told us, it would be remiss not to talk about your win in the WSOP Europe, because what I really like about this story is the fact that you weren't even thinking of going. It was almost, by this stage you were playing the high stakes. It was almost something you kind of viewed as why bother. If you could maybe tell us about that, how it came about, how you almost didn't bother going in the first place, and then you went and won.
Yeah. No, I like my World Series of Poker track record is like pretty good. It would be a shame for me to play any other more event, because I don't think I can keep up with the ratio. But yeah, I mean, like tournaments generally was like something that I actually quite liked the idea with tournaments, and I actually think tournaments probably would have been my best game actually, because I mean, I was very used to playing with different stack sizes, and I was primarily best at playing with shallow, but I was doing pretty good playing also with deeper as well. And I think tournaments are quite a complex game. I mean, they are the most complex in No Limit because of the ICM and because of all of the different situations. And I think I would have been good at figuring a lot of those ones out. And antes are also pretty helpful for bringing up win rates. But tournaments, the thing is, like, when I played, tournaments were generally, they were not really high stakes. It was just this thing where people would ask me, they would say, like, "Why, Henrik, why you're so good at this challenge? Why don't you play tournaments?" And it was just, they were not this like high stakes buying tournaments. They were like $100 tournaments or $200 tournaments, and so the hourly rate thing, math just wasn't that attractive. But on this, I mean, the story there, I think I was actually not really having a good month online, and apparently they had some type of prize thing, which was that if you deposited money to the site, like you transfer it from your Skrill or account to it was an 888 account, you got like some tickets based on the amount that you transferred. I was completely unaware of this, but apparently I was in it, and obviously I was losing so much that month. So I had a lot of these tickets. So the guy he called me up, like, from the 888 poker, and he was like, he was kind of like, "Are you sitting down?" Kind of giving me that, like, I got some really good news to tell you, and he was like, "Yeah, so you were in this like lottery thing, and like you won." And I was like, I didn't know I was in it. And then he told me, like, "Yeah, it's this tournament it's like a €1,000 buy-in." I was like, I was playing like even up to like 501k online at this time, so it wasn't like that like interesting. Yeah. And then he was like, "Well, you got like also you got like a hotel and everything is included," and I was like thinking, like, is it worth me just like skipping this and not going and just staying home to play online? But I had a friend who was going to go there as well, so I was like, okay, I just go for fun. I also didn't really like the idea that I was thinking about it. I don't really want to be known, because I wanted to have I didn't want anyone to really know I was playing poker and keeping a low profile. And but I was thinking, well, if I win it, that thing will be a little bit more out there. People will know I play poker, but at the same time I get a higher prize, so maybe that prize is worth that trade off. But yeah, so I went there, and it was a interesting. Well, I played some like live poker before that, but not that much, and it was an interesting event. I do remember some of the hands and things.
Yeah, because I think you just brought your own particular take to tournament poker, and obviously it was successful. You took down the bracelet. Without going too much down into the weeds of strategy, just give us a couple of insights as to what you really brought to the table in terms of the kind of things you did, which were obviously rather different. Because I think at the time it was like commentary, wasn't there? And like the commentators were trying to work out some of the stuff you were doing. And it was like,
yeah.
I get it, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, this was like, and even like actually when I started to play some high stakes games, like a lot of people actually thought I was bad. Like, and it was only when people started to look at like I had some I knew, like, not they were not friends telling me I was bad, but they were like friends of friends, and they were like, no, this like a Fox player, he's like terrible. Like, he's one of the worst regs. But I actually had probably had the highest win rate of all of the regs, and I was winning versus everyone. But I played a little bit unconventional in many ways. So people thought I played bad, I remember because there was these guys who were, I think they were tournament players, and they would see all the cards, and they would do the commentary on final table, and I spoke a bit to them also afterwards. But I remember also like watching with the stream, and I think what was interesting with their comments was generally like, oh, it's a bit weird, and then but like after 30 seconds they were like, yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, it was a lot. It wasn't like completely like it was that doesn't that's just bad, and they would keep the line. They would kind of go a little bit back, so yeah, no, I mean, I think in tournament poker, you're in many ways you are tapping into this thing where what does the general population do in this situation, and you try to exploit that, and you try to figure out, also if you're playing versus someone who's good, they don't know you at all, but you know generally how people play. So, you know that no one bluffs in this situation, and you know that they know that. And if you can just win a lot in those situations because they assume that you're not that good. They assume that you just play like everyone else. So kind of what you're playing versus, and yeah, you can make a lot of money in tournament poker. I think just exploiting those gaps. Especially if you're not known,
Yeah, absolutely. And all that you just said sort of shows the value of escaping from groupthink, but also the difficulty, right? It is quite hard for people in ego terms to listen to other people saying, that's no good, you're no good. But actually often the original thinker is the person who makes the money. Right? They're the one who's prepared to say, I don't give a damn what you all think.
Yeah.
I've thought about this. I know it's right. I'm going to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I did do a fair bit of coaching as well. Was a little bit involved with staking and things like that. And then I got to actually see a lot more how people are like, how do they actually think about the game? What's holding, some players back, and we had really good players. We had all like high stakes players that would be considered to be really, really good. And what I saw with a lot of players was just that they were really afraid to kind of sort of embarrass themselves a bit. Though there's nothing embarrassing about playing your hand badly in poker, but a lot of it actually was that kind of almost this obsession with you are a professional poker player already, but you want to really play like a professional poker player for other professional poker players, which is a crazy idea when you think about it. But there are a lot of limitations, I think, was there. And I always kind of was the opposite. I kind of enjoyed people thinking I'm not a professional poker player.
But that's a superpower. That actually, what you've just described there is a superpower that, I think I've dealt with this a lot with players who are like, when I play the big tournaments, I don't do what I do online. This is a typical one.
Yeah.
I don't do what I do online because they don't like that feeling of sitting there having turned over what looks like a completely out of line bluff, and everybody on the table looking at them as if, what was that all about? Yeah. I thought you were supposed to be decent.
Yes.
But actually, what they're doing there is they've actually made a calculation that was a good bluff to make, for example, but they're scared to do it.
Yeah.
And if you have the ability to say, I don't give a damn. Yeah. I know it's right. I've been working in the lab. I know that's right. I'm going to pull the trigger, and I don't care.
Yeah.
That is actually a superpower, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's the other thing as well is that if you do something crazy, I mean, there's I played some hands where I called people down with 10 high or jack high or these type of things, and people also remember them. And, you know, you can kind of use that to advantage later on. They probably are not going to bluff you. You could probably like tighten up a little bit more. And so, you know, even in these situations where you know, maybe it was too loose to call, you might actually make back that EV in many ways. But yeah, that's one thing I would have seen a lot. Just players thinking a lot of what other kind of professional players would think about how they actually play, and try to kind of fit in a way, which is really interesting because, you know, it's, you know, poker players from the outside world would be seen as complete outsiders. But a lot of the professional poker players within the game, I would say, are very crowd mentality focused. But some of the best players are, you know, you could see it. You could just study their hand histories. It's pretty crazy things that quite often happens. And I think that's what you have to do to be the best. I mean, the best players I remember kind of playing with, they don't really necessarily have a style of play. You know, they're just thinking players, really. I mean, it's the way I would describe. Like, I mean, if you have someone like Truth Teller, for example, what would probably one of the really best players I would have played with. He would be very, like, you couldn't say that he would be like an aggressive player, defensive player, or, you know, he would be very capable of doing all types of things. But not, you know, he would always look at the situation and be able to do many things. So that's what makes him kind of hard to read, you know.
Absolutely.
So I think that's generally would be the quality of this top players, that they don't really have a style of play, you know. And it's an interesting one. I mean, I remember when I first started to, like, you know, read on forums and things like that. One of the most kind of popular kind of questions would have been, are you, you know, should you play lag or tag? You know, people would always debate it. It's interesting, that debate just completely went away at some point. I don't know why. I don't know. It just faded. You know, but it was just the most common like poker strategy forum. People would make a post about this. You know, I feel like I should play tag. I feel like I should play lag.
Yeah, it's kind of been replaced by GTO or exploitative.
Yeah.
And again, I guess the correct answer is whatever works.
Yes.
You know. So yeah, absolutely. But yeah, you've kind of hit the nail on the head, which are two general mental skills. One, be completely adaptable, and two, be prepared to pull the trigger on your own beliefs.
Yeah.
When I say beliefs, I mean, you know, they're not just beliefs you've you know, come to from nothing. You know, good players go away, do their work in the lab, and come back with insights.
Yep.
And it's a real shame if you don't follow through on those insights because of fear of how it may look.
Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, I would say, like, as well, like, I mean, I got, like, also quite a bit of inspiration sometimes from, like, the fish, you know, like, you know, people refer to as the fish, because the fish also quite often, they made, like, because they're not really from the poker community and these type of things. So sometimes I would see them do a certain thing, and I would think, like, well, that's interesting. That's odd, you know. That's does it make sense to do that? And actually, they would also be quite some inspiration, not just only looking at like the other professional players. And but yeah, I mean, I think the other thing as well is, like, for me, it was really motivating when I was kind of losing a bit to try to improve my game. So I would generally use that kind of motivation a bit more to really think, no, I really have to improve my game. And I think it's it's probably a good idea to be a little bit over panicking, like, oh, I lost today, I really should put in some work on my game, rather than being very relaxed about it. That would have been another thing as well. I remember from the poker forums, someone posting a graph. It's 50,000 hands. They're playing. They show the winnings. The no-show now is, let's say the all-in EV is negative. The real winnings are negative. It goes down. And they would ask the question, is it possible I'm still a winning player? And this is actually quite common,
Yeah.
It was like their wish would have been like someone would write, yes, it's a lot of variance in the game, but the true answer is like, who cares? What you need to do is like, regardless if you're winning or losing, but especially if you are losing, from the graph, is that you need to improve your game. But I think people are always kind of sort of looking for an excuse not to actually improve their game. So like, well, I lost today. Was it because I played bad? No, it was because of, variance, etc. And so. Yeah,
the forum says I'm okay, so that's fine. I've got the 2+2 vote, so that's all right.
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely. So at some point, you decide to transition out of poker. I just want you to just tell me about that decision, first of all, and then I want you to talk about Temple, which is your real estate company. We're going to talk about that because it's a really interesting project. But tell me, first of all, why and at what point you decided to make that change, move out of poker.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this thing about like transitioning out of poker is a very interesting topic in itself, because I mean, I definitely observe, like for friends, etc., a lot of people having, especially in the high stakes community, where if you're successful in the high stakes community, you're going to have like an amount of money that means that maybe at some point you actually probably don't even have to keep on playing poker anymore. Or you can go several years without having to, you could just live off your savings. And, there's a lot of opportunities that open up if you're successful at those stakes. And, I think one of the most difficult things for me probably in my poker career was always this idea of like, what are you going to do after the poker? That probably would have consumed most of my kind of, playing of the game, and I don't think I had any extremely severe downswings. It was, actually quite smooth my whole poker career, I would say. I always had quite good win rates, and but one of the ideas that was always there was like kind of sometimes the lack of motivation, because I achieved my goals of getting to the high stakes and being winning there, and then at some point you actually start to kind of do almost this thing where you make up your new goals. It's sort of like, well, I win that tournament there, and I need to win on that side equal amount that I won there, or you can do these things endlessly. But I felt like I achieved my main goal. I made a good amount of money, and I was like kind of thinking, what should I do? And a lot of friends having similar things, and I think it's not easy to transition out of poker. It's not easy, and whatever you're gonna do is gonna be hard, because you're probably not gonna be good at it. So you have to accept that it's gonna be a learning curve. I think that for me, it's just that I felt that one, I had the economical means where I'm like, I don't think poker anymore makes sense for me to focus on. Maybe financially, I knew I was always very interested in investing and numbers, and I wanted to spend more kind of time on becoming good at kind of value investing. And then with Temple, it's something that actually quite recently it sort of made a bit of a circle, and I feel that I actually kind of finally have this more, sort of reason and understand how things kind of play into each other. Because basically, I got into poker. I believe I got into poker because I wanted I wanted to be independent, and I wanted to have that kind of freedom. It was probably not because of poker, like the game itself, but it was more of a goal towards that, and I achieved that goal. And so what we're doing with Temple is that we have this mission. We want to help basically young people to become homeowners, and we want to help with financial independence. And it's kind of, I relate to a lot of young people now where it's really hard to become a homeowner. And I know this, reaching this financial independence, it gave me so much freedom, and it was meaningful to me. So that is a mission that I kind of want to help other people, like basically achieve that. So we started real estate was something I was kind of always interested in, and looking at a few different opportunities within that. But now is a kind of time where we sort of connected, one, this passion of real estate, one, this kind of my background and the passion to kind of help young people. And, one thing with after poker for me was like, I knew there were things that I could get into that would have been a bit of an extension of poker. Trading would have been an obvious one, where you kind of changing from a game of poker, which is a niche game, into a high stakes game, where the stakes are in trading, and the global markets are just endless. And there have been many people who have done poker either on a hobby level, but they've done good in it, and they went into investing and trading, and they had tremendous amount of success. But it would have felt like just a game, which is another bit of a zero-sum game. And, so now it's kind of more this thing where I feel that I have something which is helping others with kind of my skills in a way, which is this analytical and strategic. And that feels really good, because it's like, then I can kind of say, well, poker, I developed the skill in a way under the poker time, which was kind of for myself and kind of to build my own wealth. But at least that skill later on would transition into also helping others. So that's kind of the mission of what we want to do now with Temple and building there. So it's basically our model is that you're renting, but we are helping you over time to become a homeowner. So you have ability to buy the apartment from us as a company. And then we don't like this idea of this kind of sort of tenant landlord thing, which is a very transactional relationship. Instead, we want to, we view them as not as a tenant, but as a future owner, and we want to be a partner with them and helping them out on that journey.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on a big problem for everybody who's a young person today pretty well, unless they're very, very fortunate and they've got some kind of maybe parental wealth which they can rely on. It is very, very hard in a lot of countries to get on the property ladder. And there is still a value, I guess, in having a property, if only for much later in your life, because when you're retired, you don't necessarily want to be paying rent, because that demands a certain level of continued income from you. So this is a great model, because as I understand it, what your model allows is a much reduced, for example, deposit. It's really small, effectively, isn't it? In a lot of countries now, it's quite a large deposit requirement to purchase property, but this kind of sidesteps that and allows somebody also to just get a taste of do I like this property? Do I want to be here?
Yeah.
Okay, I do. I can turn this into my own, having just made it.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think this is a problem that kind of like, I mean, if you take the real estate industry, it's a very conservative industry, and it's an industry that doesn't really innovate or change at all. And the reason for this is, one, as a collective industry, it made an amazing amount of money the last 30, 40 years. When that happens as well, you don't really want to innovate or change things or do things. So I think it's, as a company, we are now, myself, which I don't have a background in real estate, and the co-founder is kind of come from tech and from the arts. And, but then we have people with us who have been in real estate for, 25 years plus. So there's all this mix, but I think that you need someone a bit from the outside in order to actually kind of change here and come with a new idea to solve this global problem, really.
Yeah, again, sort of escaping from groupthink. This is, I mean, it's interesting. I would have thought this is a particularly attractive proposition for a lot of young poker players, because actually, getting in front of a bank manager and saying, "Hey, I want to buy a house. Are you going to give me a mortgage?" That conversation probably doesn't always go very well. Generally, they're going to have to come up with a large amount of cash and almost buy a house outright, which, it's fine. There will be a percentage of young poker players who can do that, but there'll be a much larger percentage who won't be able to do that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to build a user base on the poker players as an overall. They're such a small percentage of the population, unfortunately. But I mean, I think it's a new model in a way, and I think that's kind of what's needed. So I think it's. I think it's this idea that you're either renting or you're owning. It's a little bit too arbitrary, and I think that there's a lot of room for something to be in the middle, and there's a lot of room for when you have a customer who lives in a place and to do something more than just maybe respond to an inquiry about repair and a transfer being made to a bank account. There's a lot more you can do with that relationship with a customer that's just not being done right now. The other thing about real estate is that it's a very, very fragmented industry. I mean, if you take a lot of countries and you look at the rental stock, and you see, who are the owners of those rentals? They are actually not professional companies. They are maybe owned by someone who has another type of business, and they have a couple of properties that they're renting out. They're owned by, sometimes it could be the individual apartment can be owned by someone who's just, I don't know, an accountant or a lawyer, and they have a couple of flats, and that's a lot. That's a really, really big part of the industry. So it's not like anything else where you take, I don't know, I mean, if you buy and consume anything, it's going to be by a very professional company that makes millions telling you that, that's not with real estate. It's just, and it's like a poker table, and it's full of amateurs in a way, Now they're all trying doing their best, but it's just not it's just a small percentage where it's actually full-time dedicated, and they have teams and all of this set up for it.
And not only is your company meeting a social need, but I suppose as a consequence of that, it's also a very attractive business model, because of course it's this problem you're addressing is trying to be addressed by government across a number of countries now. So my understanding is that you'll probably be attracting some investment from states or local state bodies going forwards. So that's going to make you a very robust proposition in terms of the funding going forward.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. It's the thing from the political side is that, everyone wants to help young people to become homeowners. It does not matter if you're on the right side or if you're on the left side. So the political risk is quite sort of removed, and it's really nice to be able to do something where you have so many fans in so many ways. It's quite helpful. Because building anything, it's quite it's challenging, to build a company. But if you have a lot of people who are sharing your own and your mission, it does become a little bit easier. So that's really fascinating to see, and we can see when all the conversations we're having with people is that this is so needed, and you can see sort of like, why no one else doing this, or why is no one else thinking about this? And it's really interesting, and I think it really goes back to that the industry as a whole, it's made out of people who are quite sort of conservative in thinking about it. They don't really challenge and coming up with new ways of how you can do things, and because they're all making a lot of money just how it is now, and we just see a way where innovating and improving is one way to improve the return of these assets, but also create something which actually solves the problem.
Yeah, it's interesting. What you describe reminds me a lot of, I in the early part of my career was in the law.
Yes.
And I was a barrister, and like historically barristers were like gentlemen who often are from very wealthy families, and what they used to do was they paid their clerks a percentage of their fees because they didn't want to have them on a full-time salary. Yeah. And that lasted for a long, long time when the career changed, when it was no longer just gentlemen, by the way, it was women as well. And it wasn't all from wealthy families. But that sort of percentage the clerks took suddenly was huge money. And there were clerks on, hundreds of thousands of pounds. This is back in the early 90s when I started. There was people who were earning, there were clerks who were earning more than barristers, because if you were taking 3% or 5% of every barrister's fees, it was huge. But the barristers, people were saying that by this stage, what's going on? This is crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Some of these guys are earning more than us, and we're the ones going to court. We're the ones who spend all that time in law school. Yeah. But because it was. People were still making fine money. Let's be honest; they were still doing fine. It was like, why change? Why cause a fight? Why disrupt this? Because it's just going to be problematical. Let's just go with the flow. And that's very much the problem in a lot of industries, isn't it? It kind of everybody just says we're doing okay. Let's just stay where we are. Except it's not okay for this part of the market you're talking about. There is social need, which is being unmet. The good news is, you're going to innovate and solve that. One thing I did want to talk about is this is, an incredible opportunity right now, not just for you, but you're actually doing a funding round. Tell us a little bit about that, because it's something other people can get in on here, because I've looked at the numbers on this. And it looks very attractive. Tell us a little bit about your current funding round. Yeah,
so I mean, basically now we're opening up for the first time. We had some people who came in a little bit before, so we have a few people, so kind of friends of mine, and also other entrepreneurs that I wanted to have involved in the company because of their ideas and their support. But we're now opening up to a bit of a wider group. So there's opportunity there for people who are interested. They want to kind of they're maybe interested in real estate. They're interested in solving kind of big problems, and they have kind of been interested in maybe of being part of a little bit of a sort of a maverick group of people who think a little bit differently and wants to do something. So there's the opportunity to be involved there. I mean, real estate is the largest asset class in the world.
Yes.
It's you cannot almost put a number on it how large it is. The market we are focusing is on the German market. The largest company there is 550,000 units. So it's in terms of that, it's gigantic in terms of the opportunity. And what we see is this model of basically allowing the customers who are renting to become homeowners is unlocking a lot of values. And we think that model is just going to skyrocket in terms of like its popularity. And right now there's quite few of the companies that are doing this. So that we see is very attractive, is to be an early mover into that space. And I mean, the amount of interest that we got in this, Stephen, like just in terms of the last few weeks opening up from groups and being in conversations with some of the like largest investors in the world, it's quite, it's quite unbelievable. So there's a lot of people who sense that something very interesting is happening in here. For me, what kind of would be interesting coming from the poker community is kind of having some, let's say, of this flavor left in it. I think it's one way, because I'm coming from the poker community, to have some people who are like brilliant in terms of their thinking. They've done well in poker, and having that and being involved in some way as a shareholders, it's a thing for me to kind of reconnect a little bit with that community that kind of helped me. So if there's someone who's listening who kind of feel like they have an interest in it, would be happy to have them on board. And
what we'll do is we will, in the show notes, we'll put a link. We've got Temple have got a one-pager which kind of sets out the essence of what the business model is, how it works, and all the contact details for Temple are there, and you'll be able to speak with Henrik. Probably be able to get him to talk a bit about poker as well.
Yes.
If you do that. But it is, and the actual investment level to get on board is actually relatively.
That's what I wanted to say. Like it's actually not really for us about like the money so much. It's what we're kind of interested in now is getting like a lot of kind of interesting, smart people who can challenge us in various ways and who are actively thinking, because I've seen it myself. I've seen people who can put in millions and but they are not like active in their thinking or doing things. And as a company, that actually provides less value for us than someone who puts in, a 50,000 euro and who's part and contributing. And I think there's a lot of interesting people in the poker community, and I like that kind of connection of it. So it would be something that I think would be fun for us. And this topic also around poker and transitioning out of poker, it's one that I do. I think it's very interesting, and I think there could be some people there that it could be helpful for in that sense, because you get a little bit into a new world, and being an investor in something, you get to see a little bit around, like how is this interesting, how does it work, and all of these things. It can be helpful for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has been interesting watching you go through this process, because to me it was a bit like the way you went through poker, where you observed what the population, what the broader market, if you like, was doing, and you thought, wait a minute, people are not seeing this. Yeah. Where is it incentivized for me to act? Where is it incentivized for me to invest? And when we think about what Temple's doing, it's got to be potentially hugely scalable, right? I mean, for governments across the world are going to want to solve this problem, but they're almost certainly not going to be able to do it and not try to do it themselves in the old style that certainly in the UK it used to be done with public housing. They're going to be looking for public-private initiatives where there is this ability to draw on private investment, and your scheme is absolutely ticking the boxes in terms of taking that worry off a government but solving a big social issue.
Yeah, I mean, for us, what we always try to focus on is to build something that could really scale. I think that's the one thing with the difference with poker and kind of the business world is that in poker as a game, unfortunately, it doesn't really scale. I think the best you could probably do in poker in terms of scaling is to, in a way, kind of like run a stable in some way and kind of a little bit kind of play. You sort of like could be the kind of architect for your individual players that you have, and you kind of play through them in a way. That's probably the best you could do. I wished I would have had that insight in poker. I would have just done it like that. But yeah, in business, the good thing there is that things are more scalable. You have to like build more systems so that you can have other people knowing what to do and how to analyze things and things like that. But we are we've always been very focused on building that foundation so that it's scalable, and that's the only kind of idea that was kind of worthwhile for us is to think like, how can you build something that's super scalable.
Absolutely. On that note, just talk a minute, if you can, about your vision and goals for the future. We already have got an insight into the immediate plan with Temple, but where do you see yourself as well as Temple going in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for me personally, I kind of feel like I kind of found what I want to do, like, in the sense that I want to sort of build something that helps, especially young people, to kind of reach this kind of financial independence. So that's I think my kind of core mission and what I feel very strongly about. Because right now I don't feel like that is something that's offered and something that is theirs. I feel like it's something I can try my best to help with. That's kind of the work that we want to do through Temple. Other than that, I generally like business. I like entrepreneurship. I like trying to help others who are running a company or doing things like this, and I'm involved in a few different things there with as much time as I have, and I want to just keep on doing that, keep on learning, and just staying creative and yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, Henrik, thank you so much for all of your time today. Could probably, I know, having spoken to you many, many times before, we could probably talk for about 4 times longer about all of this, because I think your poker career and what you're doing with Temple was, in the case of your poker career and with Temple, is very innovative and very interesting. But thank you so much for the time you've given us today, and look forward to seeing how Temple goes in the future. I've got a very good feeling about it.
Super. Yes. It's a pleasure always talking to you, Stephen. I think what I really enjoy talking to you is that, your career, that you have done so many different things, and that your perspective on these things are quite, there's not many people who have done so many different things and can kind of like connect them and how they fit together. So I always appreciated our conversations, and I'm looking forward to many more in the future.
No, that's great. Thanks, Henrik.
Cheers.
So many thanks again to Henrik for sharing his time and thoughts with us. If you are interested in learning more about the Temple Future Ownership Project, there's a link in the show notes to a one-page summary setting out the proposition that they're putting forward. Like everything Henrik's done in his poker career, it's incredibly well-researched and incredibly original. So thanks again for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Mindset Advantage podcast. Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast. To get future episodes delivered to you automatically, make sure to subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcasting service. To get any resources mentioned in the episode or to listen to past shows, visit pokermindcoach.com/TMA podcast. Thanks for listening.